Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
And this week we have a special guest, Thomas Finney, and we're going to be talking about Microsoft FastTrack. And this is a program that is available to every single Microsoft customer with a few caveats, and we're going to talk about how to engage them, whether or not you're qualified, and all the ins and outs of FastTrack. But first, I'd like to give Thomas an opportunity here. Why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and give them a little bit about your background and where you come from.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Adam, for having me. The opportunity to talk about FastTrack. So I've been at Microsoft for 14 years. I was at a partner prior to that, working on Viva, so before Office 365, essentially. So quite a while. Got hooked on the cloud then. Been hooked ever since. So I came to Microsoft as a TAM or a CSAM nowadays, and then moved to FastTrack back in 2015. So it's been close to 10 years in FastTrack at this point.
And a TAM, for those who might not know, at Microsoft, we have plenty of acronyms. That's the Technical Account Manager, and the CSAM's the counterpart today, which is the Customer Success Account Manager. And so they're responsible for making sure, like, once you have purchased the solution, you are able to use it and consume it and make sure that it's deployed correctly. And as always, Adam, you want to give your quick Microsoft disclaimer?
Sure. Yeah, let's get into it. So all three of us work for Microsoft. However, we do this show on our own time and on our own dime. Microsoft does not have any editorial control or influence over the show. We of course, want to stay in good graces of our employers, but we do this show on our own and certainly share what we know, which for Andy and I, a lot of times is Microsoft and for Thomas as well. And let's face it, everyone's a Microsoft customer in some capacity or form, and learning how to take advantage of all the value included in your Microsoft agreement is something that almost all of our listeners and viewers can learn from. And so talking about FastTrack today, as Andy mentioned, it's a benefit that, with a couple of exceptions, nearly every customer can take advantage of. So we thought, hey, if there's something our listeners and viewers can get more benefit from, let's educate them on what's possible. And then you can decide if this is right to engage with in your organization.
Perfect. So Thomas, if you can give our listeners just a quick overview of what FastTrack is and the service that's available to them.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So FastTrack, it's a service provided by Microsoft. As you've mentioned, it's a benefit of your active eligible subscription. We'll talk about eligibility here in a few minutes, but it's really geared toward helping organizations adopt and deploy Microsoft 365 services, and really helping organizations maximize their investment in Microsoft 365 and achieving their business goals with Microsoft 365.
Perfect. And who is eligible to take advantage? I think that's going to be the biggest question as listeners listen to this. Am I eligible? How can you tell if you're eligible for FastTrack?
So we'll have some content and links in the show notes, but at a high level, eligibility for FastTrack is 150 minimum licenses across the major Microsoft 365 SKUs, or like for Windows as an example, it's Windows SKUs, or frontline worker SKUs also are eligible for FastTrack. That includes education, some education SKUs, as well as U.S. government, GCC High, DoD, GCC, those types of subscriptions as well.
So you get why we've been saying nearly everyone who listens to our show is likely eligible. If you have 150 licenses or more of, let's say, Microsoft 365 E3, you can engage with FastTrack to help you get deployed properly and correctly on the solutions included in it, like Microsoft Intune as one example, or Entra ID as another. So let's continue to unpack that. But that's a great benefit that, again, nearly everyone listening or viewing probably can take advantage of.
And I will say that all customers, regardless of their license count, have access to what we call advanced deployment guides. Those are built into the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, and those are available to all customers. It really takes you step by step through Intune, as an example, or Entra ID, the various services or workloads. You just don't get the access to the FastTrack delivery resources or FastTrack Ready partners, unless you have the minimum 150.
And that's a really good call out, that regardless of your licensing position or whatever, one thing Andy and I have both noticed over our years at Microsoft is that Microsoft really does want its customers using its products. It doesn't want shelfware. Almost universally, there's nobody at Microsoft that would want to sell something into a customer and have it not get used or deployed. That really doesn't benefit anyone. So there's almost universally across the organization, and there's many different parts of Microsoft that will help. We're talking to Thomas from the FastTrack Center today, but Andy mentioned your customer success account manager. There's a whole customer success unit dedicated to helping customers be successful with Microsoft as well. So that's a theme that will carry through, is we want our customers using the products they own. We want them to sing in their environment, to work well. We don't want that shelfware. And so that investment in the FastTrack Center and folks like Thomas, that's literally putting our money where our mouth is, where we are investing in people to enable our customers to leverage everything they pay for and including it in the service at no additional cost.
That's it.
Yeah. So real quick, a couple follow-up questions. Thomas, if I owned, like, say 50 seats of Windows, and then I also have 50 users of Office 365, is there a combination of the different SKUs that would get to 150, or does it have to be 150 in that specific solution area? And we're going to talk about each one of the different capabilities and solution areas that can be tied to FastTrack, but is it 150 seats of that one thing, or can it be like a combination of the different solutions? And then also, Adam mentioned real quick at the end there, I don't know if people caught it, but what is the cost to the customer? How much does this cost to use FastTrack?
Yeah, great questions. The first is 150 in that particular SKU or subscription. So it's 150 of the Windows, or 150 of Intune, or E360, or Microsoft 365, E5, whatever the case may be. And then to the cost question, it's at no additional cost to customers. It's included in their subscription. We don't use free.
Neither do we.
Free. But it's included in the subscription. It's a benefit of the subscription. But they're not sending us. We're not cutting them POs or things like that to pay for FastTrack.
All right, perfect. Yeah, no additional cost. So let's talk about the different areas that you can engage FastTrack on. So we're going to have a whole list of links for all of these that you can go and dive into. So we're just going to give a brief overview of each one of these. And we might mention different solutions as part of these capabilities. Adam and I have done a ton of shows, and most likely there's a show that's included for one of these capabilities, every single one of them. So go back and listen if you want to learn more about each individual one. We're going to assume that you know what they, at least from a high level, what they are. So talking about, say, Microsoft Defender, if you own at least 150 seats of Microsoft Defender, and that could be, correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, but a Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office, a Defender for Identity. So each one, it doesn't have to be you own 150 of all the Defender SKUs. It could be just 150 of a single part of the Defender suite. What can FastTrack help with Defender in general?
Defender in general, it's the Defender for Endpoint that you mentioned, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Cloud Apps, Defender for Identity, Defender for Cloud. There's a little bit of a Defender for Cloud we can do now, and Defender XDR as a high-level conversation, and then Microsoft Sentinel. There's pieces of Sentinel that we can help with as well. Now that recently came into scope for FastTrack late last year.
So really kind of blurring the lines there between what was traditionally considered Microsoft 365 technologies like Defender for Endpoint and Office versus like Defender for Cloud and Sentinel were considered Azure security technologies. And now it's just all covered, which we talked about on last week's show when we had Brody on as our guest, how Microsoft has changed its org chart over time to bring all security engineering under one roof and one person, Charlie Bell, who sits on our senior leadership team. And we continue to see the dividends pay out from making that change, where those lines that had traditionally existed are now being blurred. And so, for example, our FastTrack team now covers all of those security solutions, some more than others, but they've been added to the scope over time, which is really exciting for customers who really don't care. It's a Microsoft solution. It's for security. You're from Microsoft, right? You cover it. And, we always kind of have this, well, that's an Azure thing. And so to see that go away is really positive. And I'll just plug here as well, 2 products really great to engage FastTrack on in particular, Defender for Identity and Defender for Office 365. Defender for Identity involves setting up a lightweight agent that sits on your domain controller. So anytime you're touching those tier 0 systems or something really sensitive like that, you want to make sure you do it right. And so having that guidance from a team that has seen many successful deployments, really, really helpful to give you that assurance and confidence that you're going down the right path as you do it. It's not really a complicated deployment, but just, again, kind of having that reassurance of someone who's been there, done that, seen the rough edges is really helpful. And Defender for Office, of course, not just email security, but of course, that's a major portion of it. And we all know with email security, you're really only as secure as your configuration. A lot of organizations have learned the hard way that, let's say you have been an Office 365 customer for a long time and you've built up all these exceptions and exemptions you've added over time because you have this pen test coming in, you have this phishing test you're doing, your CEO wants to make sure that this survey gets through from this outside vendor, and you've poked all these holes in your configuration, and making sure you have a good baseline configuration really helps protect that environment as well. So those are 2 plugs, at least from me and my personal opinion, on areas where you can get a ton of value engaging, Thomas and the FastTrack Center on making sure that your configuration is really aligned to best practices there is going to help significantly reduce the amount of unwanted messages coming into your
point.
So, Thomas, when it comes to, say, Defender, let's use Defender for Endpoint as an example. Can FastTrack help organizations who purchased Defender for Endpoint migrate from a third-party endpoint solution like a CrowdStrike or like a Sophos, Sentinel-1? Can they help them migrate? And also, if they've already have it deployed, does FastTrack provide services like consultation, best practices, configuration advice, or even just advice around policies, or in the case of Defender for Endpoint, maybe exemptions, like if you have business critical apps and you don't want Defender for Endpoint scanning those. Are those all things that are included, or just to give our listeners an idea of what the capabilities are surrounding specifically Defender?
Great question. So the migrate term is a little something we kind of steer away from, unless it's something we deliver like email migration or file share migrations, that type of thing. We can certainly help customers, and I've worked with customers personally that we've put Defender for Endpoint in place. They've already got a third-party solution, so we start out as an example with passive mode. So Defender for Endpoint in passive mode, and we see how that kind of works, and then can certainly help them with a stage or phased approach to move from that third-party solution to Defender for Endpoint if that's something they're looking to do. Again, it's something like there's also EDR and block mode with Defender for Endpoint, so it's kind of a secondary layer of defense, for lack of a better term, with Defender for Endpoint and third-party solutions as well. And to Adam's point around Defender for Office 365, another example there is if they have a third-party solution in place for email hygiene, then Defender for Office 365 can provide that protection for Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive and those platforms that the typical email solution doesn't deliver.
So just to make sure I'm summarizing and checking my understanding also for our listeners, of course, if I'm doing an endpoint migration from, we'll just say Sentinel-1 to Defender for Endpoint, what FastTrack it sounds like, is not going to do is like, here's a script to go dump all of your settings from Sentinel-1 and import them into Defender for Endpoint. But what it would do is say, here's how we can run them side by side. Here's how you can turn this on in full enablement. Here's what all the settings do. Here's where you go to configure this, configure that. Here's the settings we'd recommend for it, but not necessarily I'm going to help you dump all the settings from the previous solution and ingest them into our solution. Not that kind of migration, but more like help you get up to speed with the solution over time, be that kind of trusted advisor, that guidance. As I'm familiarizing myself with the new solution, which is also a critical part of a migration, is of course getting up to speed on the new solution and knowing where to go and what to do and where to click and where this is and where that is. Like if someone says, hey, where do I go to do this? I do this in Sentinel-1. FastTrack can say, you go here to do that. Is that kind of a fair summation of what you're getting at?
To Andy's question about, if someone already has it deployed, can we help with best practices and guidance around that? Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we can certainly help customers with. And to the migration to the script piece, if there's something out there, from a Microsoft perspective, it's posted on our Microsoft GitHub from one of our engineering teams or something like that, we can point customers to those things. We can't, provide support around those scripts and that type of thing, but we can certainly, if there's scripts or tools out there from a Microsoft perspective, we can certainly point the customers in that direction.
Good point. Our engineering teams have developed migration tools in the past. I think of more in like the data loss prevention side of the world. I know at one point in time, we had like solutions to help customers migrate from Symantec and some of their DLP solutions and bring those over to Purview. And there were scripts provided. And, a lot of those are kind of provided at no additional support is offered. Use it if you want. And if it works for you, great. And if it doesn't work for you, but it's kind of a best effort support mechanism. And so FastTrack would point you there and kind of say, here's where you go to do it. Let us know how it goes.
But Symantec specifically, though, that is something that is under FastTrack's scope. So the semantic piece would be, and
interesting. Okay,
we've got ties to engineering that can help support that tool.
And that was for that like Purview migration stuff. Yep, got it.
Yeah. So I know we had this kind of listed later on in the notes to talk about, but I think the questions surrounding what's in scope and what's not, because this is a service that's included, there are kind of limitations to what FastTrack can do. And so we're not really, I think, and if you correct me if I'm wrong, but FastTrack is a way to kickstart a deployment of Microsoft solutions. It's also a way to provide consultation and advice around best practices. But what it's not designed to do is really provide support around issues, because we have a whole support org to do that, right? And so,
it's all remote assistance, shoulder surfing. It's walking through the console, to Adam's point earlier about helping customers figure out how to do this in Defender for Endpoint versus how to do it in Sentinel-1, as that example. And it's not project management, so FastTrack's not managing any projects for the customer, that type of thing. It's all, there's no hands-on keyboard from FastTrack resources, but it is that guidance, that regular communication and touch point with FastTrack and customers to make sure that they're progressing. Now, to your point, Andy, about support issues, our subject matter experts or technical resources, if they've encountered it, they may provide some suggestions on how to resolve it if they've seen it before, that type of thing. But again, we're not going to sit there and spend a lot of time troubleshooting issues, collecting logs, that type of activity. That's exactly what our support organization is charged to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. When you're an organization the size of Microsoft, everyone has their job. And it's like that old Bill Belichick, like do your job. And if everyone does their job, things go well. And so you do have to delegate those to the right team when they come up. But yeah, if you've seen it before, you can say, oh yeah, you flip this switch and that usually takes care of it. I'll give that a shot. And to your point, like FastTrack is not hands-on keyboard. So you as the customer, you're the one making all the changes and implementing everything on your end. They're screen sharing with you, shoulder surfing, if you will, and providing that guidance as you move through the console. And one thing I want to point out too, when you're offering a service at the scope that FastTrack does, again, you understand like 150 license minimum bar to entry is a low bar to entry, and Microsoft has a lot of customers. So of course the goal is for things to be repeatable, right? And scalable across FastTrack. And so one of the things customers will run into, and I'd be curious to kind of get your take on this, Thomas, is sometimes customers maybe take a weird sense of pride in like how much of a snowflake they are and how complicated their environment is and how unique it is. And I'll just say in general, I'll get on my soapbox and say this because that's my role on the show, is that's not desirable. And I have coached customers on this. Like, you don't want to be in a state where you are one of one. where you're the only organization that's configured this way. That makes you very hard to support and very hard to deploy new tools. You want to be in a state where when FastTrack comes in and says, here is the standard deployment guidance, this is what we've seen be successful at other organizations, you want to be able to take as much of that as possible and implement that in your environment. It is not desirable to go do a whole bunch of weird complexity unless you absolutely have to. And your North Star should be to drive that complexity out of your environment over time. Now, I'll get off my soapbox on that, but Thomas, I'd be curious to hear when you do run into that kind of pushback from customers of, well, we can't deploy this in the standard way because we're a unique snowflake and we need to do X, Y, and Z. How does this FastTrack work within those constraints? And then where are times when you kind of have to put your hands up and say, we've taken you as far as we can go on that? I'd be curious to just kind of hear that from your experience over time.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. We do encounter customers like that. It's really, it depends. This kind of resolve answers. But if it's something that falls within FastTrack scope, we'll provide best effort. We'll work with the customers as best we can to help them move forward. If it gets to a point where it's something that's kind of in this gray area, or if it's completely unsupported, obviously we don't go there. And if it's out of scope with FastTrack, then that's where we can bring in. So those type of situations, we can bring in our FastTrack Ready partners and work with the account teams, or maybe even the customer success unit that Andy mentioned earlier, to see if there's something that unified support can provide, or if it's something completely out of scope, then maybe it's something that a partner has expertise in, and we can bring in the right partner to help the customer move forward and deploy or onboard Microsoft 365 services.
So it's a never a no. It's more of a yes, but let's have this team kind of take you from here, or yes, but let's go bring in a partner, FastTrack Ready partner to help guide you through that. And that's great. One of the takeaways I wanted to make sure our listeners got out of this show is, I would say unfairly, sometimes FastTrack is the subject of criticism. So what I wanted listeners to be able to take away from this show is not only what FastTrack is, what it does, but here's how you be successful with FastTrack. Like, here's how you can maximize the value that is included, again, in your Microsoft licensing with the FastTrack team. And so that's where I got on my soapbox a little bit and was saying, remember, your goal as an organization should be to run it as close to standard guidance and standard configuration and best practice as possible. Some IT pros wear the complexity of their environment as a badge of honor. And I think that's more of a scarlet letter, to be honest. If you have too complex an environment, your goal should be to drive complexity out. So off my soapbox now and on with our programming. Andy, where did you want to take us next?
Yeah, well, you mentioned Symantec and Purview. So what are the capabilities for FastTrack around the Microsoft Purview stack?
Yeah. So for Purview, it's information protection. That includes DLP. We talked about insider risk management, which has been something that's been pretty popular from an engagement perspective lately. Communication compliance. So making sure that the communications in Teams, as an example, or abiding to company policies. E-discovery and audit, the premium versions of those services. Also data lifecycle management and Purview records management are all included from a FastTrack.
And seeing that, Adam and I have talked about data security quite a bit on the show lately, especially for a lot of organizations, this being one of their most immature areas, because data security just over the years has taken a back seat. And then with the boom of AI and all of these generative AI applications, now all of a sudden it's had this renewed focus. I think this, as you go through that list, Thomas, I think this is one of the areas that a lot of customers can take advantage of, just being able to scope sensitivity labels, DLP policies. Communication compliance in itself is pretty extensive. That's a solution that's built into Purview to look at if I'm making threats internally or just kind of ramping up, and it's kind of protect against bullying, harassing, or anything that might represent a threat to the organization. You can
Workplace
monitor those
violence.
those things are things that are difficult, and having, I think, a partner, FastTrack here with experience in how to scope initial policies and kind of get you started on the right foot is extremely beneficial. So for me, as you talked about those, I just think this is an area that if I was a customer, I would absolutely engage FastTrack in.
That's a great point. To your remark about Copilot, the AI capability, we've seen a large increase in customer engagement around data security, for sure. I'll make this statement about Purview, but also just kind of broadly covers all the FastTrack services that we assist with, is there are pieces of these services that FastTrack can't help with, and those are all detailed in the links that we'll provide in the show notes. The classic example I use is from a data security perspective. FastTrack can't help customers define their taxonomy. We can help them implement the taxonomy. They're partners or maybe even unified support engagements that will help customers define those labels and taxonomy around data classification. So once those are in place, FastTrack's able to help customers provide the guidance around implementing those requirements based on the taxonomy.
That's a great call out. And we talk about a lot with data security. One of the reasons it's challenging is because it requires so many different stakeholders above and beyond just IT. It's the technical piece of it is not insignificant, right? You do want FastTrack to help you stand up all of that, but there is pre-work to be done before that usually involves legal, compliance teams, IT teams, data governance teams. There's
HR.
all sorts of teams, HR, yeah. All sorts of teams that need to be involved to make those taxonomy and data classification decisions before you implement that in the technology. And then, yeah, there's some rough edges to watch out for as well. And, that brings me to another point. A lot of the guidance that comes from FastTrack, Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is kind of co-developed with product groups, with product engineering. And so it's an extension of our product groups in terms of this is how they say you should deploy this stuff. And so you talk about kind of getting close to the source and really deploying something in a way in which it's intended to be used. This helps you do that, which is really exciting as well. Again, from a supportability and manageability perspective long term.
Yeah, excellent point.
So just to kind of be crystal clear, if I was a customer and I wanted Purview deployed, let's talk about information protection specifically, and I want you to protect all of my sensitive information, that's not something that is within FastTrack's scope. But if I say I want a label that can encrypt all internal documentation, FastTrack can help implement that specific label with that specific capability.
Correct, yes. Now, FastTrack can point customers to tools like the name of the tool is escaping me. I think Content Analyzer or Content Explorer.
Sensitive information, types and discovery.
Kind of see what you have currently in your environment that may be sensitive, or so we can point them to tools to kind of discover that type of data. But to your point, yeah, we can't just help them define those things.
Just wave the magic wand. Come on.
Yeah, right.
Protect all my stuff. Yeah,
Right.
So you do have to have an idea of what is there, which is really the basis of security is inventory. Like know what you have. And that's really the part that Adam is talking about is you got to work with those different stakeholders to discover what is actually sensitive. And then once you know that, you can then have FastTrack come in and define those specific capabilities around your sensitive information. Okay, so Entra. What's included with Entra?
So Entra's expanded significantly recently. So the standard Entra ID P1 and P2 ID governance. Global secure access is recent for FastTrack. Internet access for Microsoft services. I'm not sure if you've done a show on that yet, but internet access, so Microsoft Entra internet access as well as Entra private access. Those are all included from an Entra ID perspective.
Yeah, and this was something that came out, and I'm not sure if we actually updated our listeners on it, but internet access for M365 services is included with ME3 licensing now, I believe. So it's essentially you're getting secure access to M365 services at no additional cost if you're an M licensed organization. So and FastTrack can help deploy that's like the proxy service, and then we also have for a lack of a better word, like the VPN access. It looks like
just one kind of point there around FastTrack can also help customers move or sync their identities from on-prem Active Directory to Entra ID. That's something that if a customer hasn't done that yet, then that's something that identity integration piece that FastTrack can assist with as well. Obviously, that's the foundation for a lot of our services like Exchange Online, OneDrive, those types of core, quote unquote, core services from an Office 365 perspective. Those things need to be in place for customers to onboard. So we can certainly help with that piece as well.
All right. So picking it back up here, we have Intune. So for FastTrack, Intune, I think, has been bread and butter for a long time. What's really included? I think we've added some additional capabilities like Intune Suite. Is that all included? And how can we help customers maximize their Intune investment?
Yeah, to your point, Andy, it's been around since the beginning of the FastTrack, really, so for 10 years plus now. So it's the mobile device management guidance. We also provide mobile application management guidance for non-enrolled devices. We also help with modern device management, so the cloud native conversations and how to approach that and how to help customers move to the cloud native certificate delivery with some caveats, again, all in our service description. Cloud attach or co-management can help customers with that configuration as well. Endpoint analytics, the base endpoint analytics, and then to your point around Intune suites, all the different capabilities within Intune suite. So you've got enterprise privilege management, enterprise privilege management, enterprise application management, remote help, firmware over the air, and then specialty device management as well. Probably one I'm not thinking about there. So, but the full Intune suite capabilities are right now in scope for FastTrack.
And again, I think that is something that is still very much at top of mind for a lot of organizations. The co-management piece, that's huge. I think having someone with experience on how to implement that firmware over the air, I didn't even know that was possible. So that is really cool. The enterprise application management portion, that is something that's fairly new to the Intune suite. We haven't really even talked about that much on the show, but that's a competitive piece that Microsoft just recently came out with to a lot of the desktop management pieces, and it's a way to essentially deliver applications from a catalog. So if you're familiar with Intune, previously you had to, use the Intune.win file format and upload it, and then versioning came out, I think probably a couple of years ago. So there was before no way to do versioning. Now there is, but now we have a catalog of applications that are pre-built with all the install command lines that you need that you can just click on and deploy, and it helps do that. And so that's a piece that is brand new, and FastTrack can help out with that.
Endpoint privilege management, I think I said enterprise, but it's endpoint privilege management. So making sure that users have the appropriate access, or if they need access to install software, then that process can be used to do those types of activities.
Yeah. So a lot of capabilities there. The mobile piece, MAM, co-management, all of the different Intune suite pieces, analytics, which I think is huge as well. So definitely take advantage of Intune if you need some help with deployment with
and that's across all supported platforms for Intune. So your typical Windows, iOS, Android, but also Linux, Mac OS. We've made a lot of investment and improvements in Mac OS management recently from an Intune perspective. So that's there as well.
Yeah. If you haven't kept up with the announcements, I mean, we're pretty close to parity with some of those other MDM providers around Mac OS. And many listeners and customers may not know that Intune can be used for Linux. So that's another thing. If you have Linux desktop, which is not really a thing that happens a lot, but it can. I've seen it at some organizations. Intune can help manage that as well. So into some of the productivity pieces, this is a security podcast, but of course, when we talk about FastTrack, it extends beyond just security. We have some of these pieces, and we can just touch on them real quick. So Microsoft Viva, that's something that is offered, and then we'll tie that in with O365. So within the kind of productivity suite, what can you do with Viva and O365?
So Viva, the employee experience, Viva Engage, Insights, those types of things. I know with recent Copilot announcements, some of that stuff is now included in certain subscription plans, but at a high level, we can help with the Viva suite. Microsoft 365 Copilot obviously is a big change for FastTrack and a big focus for FastTrack. Exchange Online, kind of like Intune, these have been around forever in FastTrack. Exchange Online, OneDrive, Teams, all the basic collaboration services. And then the data migration piece, if customers have 500 licenses minimum, they're eligible for FastTrack data migration services. So migrating from an on-premises Exchange environment to Exchange Online as an example, or migrating files and file shares on-prem to OneDrive or SharePoint Online or Teams to get to choose where that content goes. Yeah, I mean, again, I've been in FastTrack for 10 years. Those are the kind of the core services I like to refer them to as. So, but we obviously expanded over those 10 years as well to include all the security and data security and threat protection components from Microsoft as well.
All right, so the next one that I wanted to highlight is Windows. And so we have quite a bit that falls under just Windows general deployment for FastTrack. I'm curious, do you help with, like, say, upgrading from Windows Pro to Enterprise, and then maybe some of the security settings around Windows? That's maybe falls under Defender, but it's like Windows Defender, like things like attack surface reduction rules or like BitLocker, those sorts of things. And then also the other things that are associated with Windows, like Windows 365, Universal Print, Microsoft 365 applications, Edge.
Yeah, so the BitLocker piece, absolutely covered by FastTrack. The attack surface reduction rules, there's some caveats there around what FastTrack can assist with, but I think something that's pretty focused from customers is Windows 10 goes end of support in October, I think it is, mid-October, something like that. So we can certainly help customers move from Windows 10 to Windows 11. Windows 365 is in scope for FastTrack, help customers with deploying that in their organization, Microsoft 365 apps, and then Microsoft Edge browser configuration as well.
What about the other versions of Windows? So like at some organizations, they might have the long-term servicing channel or the other flavors, so like Windows Server or Windows IoT, I think, like a flavor of the long-term service channel. What about the other versions of Windows beyond just desktop Windows 10 and 11?
So our focus, we do have resources that can have the conversation around different channels with customers and find the best fit for the organization and their groups within the organization. We don't help customers with the server platform or the IoT platform. So it's really just focused on the desktop client side.
Perfect. Okay. And then the final one, and this is also, I think, a core feature of FastTrack that has been around for a while. I remember talking about this way back when people were moving from Windows 7 to Windows 10, but the App Assure program. Oh, and we have one more piece after that, but we'll talk about App Assure real quick. So kind of give our listeners an idea of what App Assure is and how FastTrack can assist with that.
Yeah, so it's been around quite a while now. So it's really focused on helping customers, making sure that applications that work on Windows 7 or in recent cases Windows 10 work on Windows 11. Or if you've got something that works in Microsoft Edge, Internet Explorer back in the day, so they would help customers move that to Microsoft Edge as an example. So it's really app compatibility focused, so helping customers, again, make sure that those things are seamless essentially across the platforms.
And then something that has come up recently is Copilot, of course. So around maybe M365 Copilot or Security Copilot, like what are the capabilities that FastTrack can help with Copilot in general?
So from a Microsoft 365 Copilot perspective, it's really helping customers make sure that all the prereqs are in place to start out, lay that foundation essentially. Those conversations typically, to your point earlier, Andy, highlight data security challenges within organizations and needs around Copilot and what that has access to. So those have been very good conversations with customers over the last several months. And then there's also user adoption conversations that FastTrack can have with customers and help them along. And I know our unified support teams have various engagements and offerings around that as well, deeper than FastTrack can provide. It's really helping customers with the Copilot Success Kit from a FastTrack perspective. And then around Security Copilot, we've just recently added Security Copilot, the embedded experience. So anything in the console, like Microsoft Entra ID console, Copilot, we can kind of provide customers a walkthrough of those capabilities. And that's across Entra ID, Intune, Purview, Defender, the console experience really.
And for the most part, the feedback I'm getting from customers is the embedded experience is their preferred experience for a Security Copilot because it's side by side in the dashboards and portals where customers are working every day. And so having that Copilot alongside them to ask questions about this conditional access policy I'm building here in the Entra portal. What is the impact of this? What do I need to know about it? Or similar behaviors, being able to summarize, hey, I've got 1,000 data loss prevention alerts here in the Purview portal. Summarize these for me and tell me kind of what are the key themes here. And it might be, you have one policy that is triggering 99% of your alerts. You may want to take a look at that. It may be a little too trigger happy. So,
all right. So let's talk about how to engage FastTrack. So if I'm a customer, how do I start the process to engage and get some help in deploying?
It's a great question. So we recently moved our request for assistance or RFA process into the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So there's a way for customers to go into the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, submit a request for FastTrack assistance. It will have, it'll light up all the different workloads or services that the customer is eligible for, and they can choose the appropriate service that they need help with. Another option is for the folks on our side, the Microsoft side, the customer success account manager example, or the account technology strategist. They can submit requests on behalf of the customer, but that request goes to a global admin in the customer's tenant who has to approve the request. So it's not just like we can willy-nilly request FastTrack assistance for customers and there's no stamp of approval from the customer perspective on that. Recent change for us, but I think it's a good change and it's been working well so far.
Yeah, and just to go back, something popped up into my head actually. You had mentioned Defender for Cloud, and just recently, it's funny, I actually requested FastTrack assistance to help out at a customer to help do some deployment for Defender for Server, which is part of that Defender for Cloud. And I think FastTrack is expanding on that workload side. I don't know if they have resources for all of the workloads, but for sure, a Defender for Server is part of it. And I actually have a meeting with the customer to kind of start that process with FastTrack. So really, yeah. Okay, so I want to end with partners because we did kind of touch on partners a little bit throughout here. What are FastTrack Ready approved partners? And then also, I think if you can just talk about it real quick, like a way that you can bridge capabilities, because I know that sometimes FastTrack maybe have things out of scope, but the partner might have things within scope. So there are ways to use a partner as part of a paid engagement, or, there's like stuff that's in scope, stuff that's out of scope, and the partner can still provide stuff that's out of scope, but you would have to, pay for those particular things. But of course, you get some that's included. So how does that really work? And maybe you can speak to this, or maybe Adam has experience around it. I think with some of these things, maybe we can even provide that funding, maybe through an ESIF process or something like that for the stuff that might be out of scope for FastTrack itself. So a lot of different ways to kind of still get this help that you need. So if you want to talk about that real quick, Thomas.
Yeah, glad you circle back to this one. We have FastTrack Ready partners. So these are partners that are approved to deliver the FastTrack benefit themselves. So not working directly with a FastTrack architect like myself or one of our counterparts or one of our subject matter experts. Those partners can deliver the FastTrack benefit. I'll go kind of back to the classic example I gave earlier. So they could deliver the FastTrack benefit to help customers with that data security piece. But if they need to do the taxonomy conversation we had earlier, then obviously the partner, if they have that service available, then they can certainly work with the customer, and that would be the part of the paid engagement, and then they could go back and deliver the FastTrack benefit to implement those requirements essentially. So one example, there's lots of different scenarios out there. And then to your point about funding, there is some type of internal review process for FastTrack just to make sure that what's being asked is not within FastTrack scope. Obviously, we want customers paying for things that are already can be delivered by FastTrack. So that's the extent of the knowledge I have around our internal funding. And I just know that we do have a part in that process, making sure that, again, it's not what's being asked is not in FastTrack scope. Maybe Adam can touch more on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Andy, I think you basically laid the framework there for the idea. So let's say you want to do an engagement that combines what's included in the FastTrack benefit with some things that are out of scope of it, and you have a FastTrack Ready partner engaged to do that work. Basically, it becomes really a behind the scenes exercise of like, we're going to build this effort here and we're going to build this effort there. But it's certainly possible to kind of bring all that together. And keep in mind, like, there's still going to have to be at least kind of some soft lines between those things. Like, okay, we're delivering the FastTrack benefit now. Okay, we've completed this work. Now we're going to pivot to this work that's either customer funded. It could be Microsoft funded through something like an ESIF you talked about, Andy, which generally is either usage or sales related. And you can bring all that together, but then you work with the same partner throughout. And so it's a bit more of a seamless experience, but you could do that, or you could, to Thomas's point, anytime we deliver funding, we do ask our FastTrack architects to review the work being done and make sure that it's not already included in the FastTrack benefit, because to his point, why should we pay for something that's already effectively paid for? We don't want to pay for it twice, and nobody should want that either. It's wasteful. So there's ways we can make sure that that's all on the up and up, but absolutely possible to do, and I've seen done in the past to bring those efforts together. In general, you kind of get the sense that whenever you work with Microsoft, there's more than one way to get things done. So we start with, where are you trying to go? and then let's make a plan to get you there. And we can combine all of the folks under the Microsoft roof, again, whether that's our FastTrack team, our customer success team, any folks in your account team, any solution area specialists like Andy and I that focus only on security, to help build the plan to get you to where you want to be. Because like I said at the very top of today's podcast, Microsoft absolutely has a North Star that we want our customers using the technology they own and pay for. And so everyone is motivated, even incented in many cases, to build a plan to help you get.
Kind of an anecdotal story is, when I was at a customer at an organization, we wanted to test out, do a POC of Microsoft Sentinel. And so at that time, FastTrack wasn't available to do anything with Microsoft Sentinel. So we worked with our sales team, someone like Adam, someone like myself, to kind of purchase the service. But even though Sentinel is Azure consumption, and then we got ESIF funding, which is Microsoft funded, for a partner, which we had a guest on the show, John Joyner. He's MVP with accountability.
Wrote the book on Azure Arc.
Yeah, wrote the book on Azure Arc. He's great. And so Microsoft paid that partner to do the POC, and Microsoft even gave the organization that I worked for, Azure credit. It was a ton of Azure credit, something like $30,000 or something like that we were not going to use up all of it, but it gave us credit to do for the POC. And then after the POC was done, because as part of the POC and ESIF funding, there's a SOW that the partner has to stick to. Past the SOW, we actually kept them as a managed security service provider, an MSSP. And so, that was part of the post engagement, which was an opportunity for the partner to kind of continue their services. But, something like when you're doing like an EA renewal and you buy something new, as part of that renewal, you can, we do have funding available to deploy certain services. ESIF is kind of, each program changes year to year. So there's specific definitions of what's included as part of that Microsoft will help fund for customers to deploy. And we have ESIF approved partners to do that. And they'll have to go through a whole approval process to get the funding. But again, some of it can be funded through FastTrack. That's part of your as a customer, something that's included. And then anything that's additional that might be out of scope for FastTrack could be ESIF funded, or could be just paid for as a paid engagement from the customer. But there's a lot of ways, and our goal really is, as a Microsoft customer, as folks that work for Microsoft, is to get you the most use out of your purchase, right? We want you to be successful and use the things that you bought. All right. Well, Thomas, thank you for coming on our show, help educating our listeners on FastTrack. This is definitely something that I think will be new for a lot of organizations, a lot of listeners. They may not even know that this service exists and that it is included. So appreciate you coming on the show and talking about it.
For having me.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
All right, and that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening. As always, we're going to have a ton of links in the show notes to all of the different services included with FastTrack, how to engage them, how to request them, all of the different expectations you might have around it. So definitely check that out. Our contact information, as well as Thomas's, will be in the show notes as well. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. If you have any topics that you want us to talk about in the future, just email Adam or myself. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.